The reality check sponsored by Leaders with Vision. On your table, you will find white cards to fill out your questions. If you know what the questions are that you brought with you, go ahead and fill them out now so that we're ready to ask the questions immediately after our presenters finish. Each of our presenters will have 6 minutes. John, are you going to be the timekeeper?
No.
You're going to have to be the timekeeper. Stuart's not here. She's in Texas.
That's what I volunteered for, yes.
Okay. We invite all of y'all, if you're not already a member, to join Leaders with Vision. We will be changing our fiscal year to July 1 through June 30th, and anyone who has paid their dues will be so prorated. So expect to hear from us very shortly. We find that the summer is going to be the time when we can get some of that paperwork done that we never have time to do during session and during the election season. Now, this fall, we will be hosting candidate forums, both on the Senate and the congressional level, and others as we can work them into our schedule. So watch for that. Our next lunch with leaders will be the third Thursday in August. And members, look for a member social on the weekend of Labor Day. It's a great kickoff for the election season, and we're going to have a barbecue. So sign up for membership now. Well, now that we're here and we're presumably safe, the legislators have gone home, and now we only have to worry about one person, the governor, and what he signs into law. We are going to ask these very fine experts to tell us what they think and reviewed the legislative session. And we were going to start with the Secretary to the Senate, Glenn Kapp. Glenn?
That didn't work. Got to hold it, huh?
Yep.
Thank you, Gene. Well, we had a rather interesting session, starting with the state budget. All $24.6 billion of it. Our state budget this time was reduced by about 3.2%. And one of the interesting things, we authorized 1,000 less state employees. Last year, the way we balanced the budget is we made cuts, quote unquote, in what is called the preamble, or the front of the state budget. And basically, we just gave the governor the authority to do whatever he needed to do across the board to balance the budget. Everybody went home. They had put put money in a number of programs that they thought were extremely important, elderly programs, various programs, and found out later that the governor cut them off, which certainly upset them. I think that for the Senate's part, when they came back this time, they were determined that they were not going to allow that to happen again. It is the legislature's responsibility to balance the budget. As you know, the state, through the governor, has hired a company out of New York to do an evaluation of all of state government and come up with efficiencies in state government and come up ways that we can do things to cut our spending. And they have found ways to cut a lot of spending, I think a total of somewhere around $75 million. When we finally got to the final stages of the budget, we were still short about 68 million. What the Senate did and the House adopted was we went in and took those efficiencies, and we gave the governor. He wanted the efficiencies done, so he can cut specifically within state departments what those efficiencies are, instead of having the carte blanche across the board. So that's how we ended up balancing it. One of the things that they came with efficiencies that they said we needed to do was close down numerous of our offices across the state for renewal of your driver's license. And that didn't go over very well, certainly in the rural areas. That was something that was canned and taken off the board, so your driver's license is, all of those little local driver's license offices will remain open. That was taken off but we did get it balanced. Part of it was we did put in $4.4 million for state police raises that they haven't had in a couple of years, and we did add $26.5 million in the budget to allow for state employees performance-based raises, so that will be there. The delinquency tax amnesty program, we extended it for another year. It in 2014 still has 100% credit for your interest, and I think it's 50% on penalties. And in 2015, that's a reduction. I think it's somewhere around 33% in your interest, and maybe 50% in penalties for 15. And there's a provision in there that we can't do it again until 2025. So, but they did extend that tax delinquency. Minimum foundation program, we put $3.6 billion in. It's an increase. It's the first time we've redone it in about 5 years. It's an increase of 2.75%. It comes to a total of some $3,961 per student in the state, and that's an increase from $3,800. Health care, as you know, we refused to expand eligibility for Medicaid under the Affordable Health Care Act, but we created a thing called the Louisiana First, America Next Freedom and Empowerment Plan. It's kind of an interesting plan because the governor came up with this America Next plan, and he presented it all over when he was running, and he talked about all the wonderful things he was going to do. Hopefully, I guess, when he became governor, it was to expand health care, to lower costs and improve health care for healthcare outcomes. And what we did in the Senate, and it passed the House, was pick up that plan. We adopted it as a legislative plan, and we gave it back to him, and we gave the Department of Health the opportunity to come up with his plan and to implement it by September, I believe. Supposedly it's going to be cost effective, and it's going to be a wonderful thing that the governor's come up with, so we've given him the opportunity to do that. We allow the sale of alcoholic beverages in movie theaters. We changed the terminology of incest, and one of the things we found in the crime of incest is when someone is charged with incest, immediately you know that someone in that family, and it kind of the victim gets highlighted real quick. So you won't see the crime of incest anymore. It'll be crime against nature. Took all that out and changed it, hopefully to protect the innocent more. Oh, I don't have much time left. I'll jump real quick to legacy lawsuits. We tried to clarify some of the legacy lawsuit stuff. There was a big fight, and codified some of the court decisions in legacy lawsuits of what the penalties would be. We did that. The coastal restoration lawsuit, protection lawsuit, that was a real big one, and I know it's been a controversy for a long time about the lawsuit that's going on with the Flood Protection Authority out of New Orleans, and basically we passed legislation that kills that. We had an equal pay bill that Lwvision promoted. That equal pay bill basically codified the federal equal pay law. Elections, we did approve the authority to create an independent party. You can't just go down and sign up as independent. You got to have enough people to become an independent party, but now you can call yourself an independent party. Any recall elections, we did provide for recall elections, that if you're recalled, you can't rerun in that office. Many of you remember the controversy across the river in Port Allen, and that kind of prompted all that. So if you get recalled, you can't immediately run back in that position. And one of the things, believe it or not, was highly important to a lot of people, didn't get a lot of press, but we changed the law to provide that service dogs can be used by service individuals that have either traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress syndrome. Well, I'll quit there. I guess I run out of time.
Thank you, Glenn. And our next report will be from the House and from the clerk of the House, Butch Spears.
Thank you, Gene. Good afternoon. All of those things that Glenn just talked about were things that the Senate accomplished. I don't have to talk for 6 minutes about what the House did. Mostly what the House didn't do would take me the rest of the afternoon to talk about. But those issues that were important to House members that we didn't do are numerous. I created a tracking list of 39 separate bills that were, quote, hot topics in the House. Some of those were also Senate bills, and the legislature passed 9 of those 39 bills, 4 of which were House bills, 5 were Senate bills. One of the hot topics was whether we were going to regulate the payday loan industry. People who don't have credit, don't have the ability to get credit from a licensed financial institution, often find themselves in the bind and needing immediate cash, and so they walk into a storefront, they sign a post-dated check for an amount of money. They're handed less money than that check is worth, and then if they don't pay, they can't make that check good, then they walk back in the same storefront, they sign a new one for an even larger amount of money, and it just gets into this horrible cycle for them. And one of the pushes this year was to see if they couldn't limit the number of times those people were subjected to that abuse. And we passed a bill that was supported by the payday loan industry that did not accomplish anything on behalf of those consumers, and it certainly helped the payday loan industry. We passed a bill that provides that if the state is going to hire lawyers, outside lawyers, they have to be these detailed reports and a limitation on how much money they get paid. The limitation is $500 a month. An hour. Yeah, not a month. Goose, even I don't work for that, and I work for free. And no one could. It was a head scratcher for so many people until one of the brighter members of the House decided that they'd look into it. And it seems that all of these pharmacy settlements that the AG has managed to get against Big Pharma, because they've been overcharging the state on the formulary. Well, we're paying private attorneys out of Washington, D.C. and New York to do that, and they're charging us much more than $500 an hour. And so, my God, this is not good for us to be paying lawyers out of state all this money to make sure that the state gets money back that those pharmacy companies shouldn't have charged us in the first place. And so we're going to make sure that those abuses of the legal system are reported on. The one part of the debate about Common Core that actually managed to get through the process was whether or not all of the information is going to be collected to further the purposes of Common Core, and that was to judge your students' performance against everybody else in the country, that information was going to remain completely private and would not be used to violate the students' privacy interests. federal law already mandated that, but we made sure that Louisiana law also mandated that. Though we hate most parts of the federal government, we don't hate those parts that we like. And then part of the attempt to claim that we're funding higher education better is the creation of a $40 million fund called the WISE Fund. I don't know, Workforce and Innovation for a Stronger Economy. I'm going to let Albert actually talk to you about what that's going to do for colleges. That won't take up more than 30 seconds of his speech. But in exchange for $750 million in cuts to their direct state funding over the past 5 years, we've given them back $40 million. Those were the hot topics that passed the House. The one that Glenn talked about, the suit on the SLPFA, that's the Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Authority East, and the temerity they had to sue oil and gas for destroying the coastline of Louisiana, because, my God, oil and gas has paid royalties to the state of Louisiana of billions and billions of dollars, except I never heard anybody explain what a royalty was. I mean, I know a royalty is when you pay somebody for the use of what they already own. And so all that money that oil and gas has paid us for their right to take the oil and gas from below our land that actually belongs to all of us is certainly supposed to recompense us for the damage they did to the land that's on top of, or was on top of all that oil and gas. However, after the bill passed, a professor at Loyola Law School wrote a memo that said, oh, by the way, you know, this bill is likely to also cancel all the government actions against BP for the Macondo well blowout. And maybe you ought not to sign it. The governor canceled the signing ceremony yesterday, but Stephen Wagasbeck, who is the new president of the Lwvision, assures us that the governor's going to sign the bill. We don't care what it does to the BP suits, and that's all the time I have. Thank you.
Our next presenter, and whose organization has been with us from the very beginning, 19 years ago, is the Public Affairs Research Council, now headed up by Robert Travis Scott. Please welcome Robert.
Well, thank you, Gene. They raised the amount of money I have to pay on my fishing license. And I just want to get that out of the way right up front. And that will create some kind of new fund that we can sweep to help pay our hospital bills. So we'll see what happens to that. I really have to begin by saying that we all miss John McGinnis. I've done this lunch several years in a row. I noticed lots of familiar faces. I know a lot of you probably knew John. As a lot of people pointed out after he passed away last week, everybody kept saying, oh, I just saw him, I just talked to him, I just met with him. And he really got around. He really touched a lot of people's lives. And I think he really performed such a great service as the role of a journalist in democracy. And that's the thing that we really valued for. We had a very special relationship with Parr, and even wrote a book about Parr, which I would recommend. It's a book that's not only a history of Parr, but also a good little contemporary history, political history of Louisiana. But turning our attention to the legislative session, what a difference $900 million can make. We've talked about the budget in terms of little cuts and little increases here and there, little programs here and there, but really the 2014 legislative session, it ended with a budget that was balanced very conveniently with contrived and borrowed revenue and the further depletion of trust fund resources. It was a harmonious budget discussion, unlike some we've had in the past, but don't mistake peaceful harmony for good fiscal policy. The budget allows spending increases for some government programs, and it also initiating some potentially beneficial streamlining measures, we hope. The legislature made the right move by refusing to balance the operating budget with an expensive loan from the New Orleans Convention Center That would have been, I think, a very poor fiscal move. So I think the legislature did the right thing in not going along with the administration on that. They also refused to launder one-time money through the state's Coastal Restoration and Protection Fund. I think it's a good idea that they backed off of that. Something they've done many years in the past. They decided this time it's not the way we're going to treat the coastal fund. Not only do I think that's more in line with what the Constitution says we should be doing, but it also doesn't leave you another hole in next year's budget. And everybody's watching now, more so than in the past, about how Louisiana is going to be handling its coastal spending. There's a close attention to us from Congress, from the various federal agencies, the courts, various stakeholders around the country, looking to see how we're going to handle our coastal money. So I think it's a good idea that we start treating this fund with a little more integrity. The overall budget for the fiscal year was $24.6 million. I think I said about 3, maybe 3 or 4% less than the current budget year. And that represents a decrease in federal revenue and a little bit of an increase in state general fund spending. But how we really did it was approximately $900 million combination of trust fund depletions, a tax amnesty program, which really just borrows from yourself from the future, a debt defeasance maneuver, lawsuit settlement, fund sweeps. You know, the legislature and the administration managed to find enough revenues to sustain the state spending plan for the fiscal year that begins July 1, mostly through these mechanisms. And the great majority of that money will be unavailable to us for the fiscal year 2016 Budget Balancing Act. And we'll be here talking about a year from now. Now, I'm sure there are going to be fresh windfalls and new sources of one-time money that are going to occur next year, but there are also very likely going to be new expenses that are lurking out there. We've already seen there might be a reckoning with the federal government over the hospital privatization payments. But we had increased spending programs for this year. Glenn outlined some of those. Some of these create more expenses going into the future. So we have a revenue hole. We don't know how quite big it's going to be next year, but we remain out of sync with what we take in for operating revenue and what we take in and what we spend for operating expenses. Now, important progress was made in a few areas. I want to say that I think, remind us that I think the General Administration has its eye on the ball on a few things. I've been critical about them, about a number of issues here. But I think they've had their eye on the ball in trying to keep state government from growing, especially in terms of employee numbers. And we've seen there was a huge trend in growth of employee numbers over the years, and we've seen that decline. Really good progress was made on state retirement systems and their method of providing cost of living adjustments. And I like we have time later on to tell you a little bit about campaign finance reform and the bill that passed with that. There were no new standards passed in terms of donations or what you could or could not spend on campaign finance reform, but there was a very minor step forward in terms of disclosure. I'd be glad to talk about that more later if you'd like. And our time is up. We'll move on.
As you know, these are very challenging presentations because they're trying to sum up 45 days of, you put in the adjective, of what the legislature did, okay, in 6 minutes. So be sure and write out your questions as we go through this, and you raise your hand, someone will pick them up and bring them up. Next, we have the minority report from Dr. Albert Samuels, who are reporting on minorities and women. Albert? How did they fare?